Would you introduce yourself for us, please?
Okay, my name's Charles Spaetti. I'm attorney here in Evansville. One of the questions I think they usually ask, it was September 26, 1972. I was sworn in. That's coming up this Saturday, I think, 48th anniversary.
Are you from Evansville?
Yeah, I'm an Evansville fellow.
Where'd you grow up?
Well, on the north side of town, near Stringtown School. First went to St. Teresa, then they built Holy Redeemer, and I'm Rex Monday, 66. I once had a lady tell me, "Oh, you're too young to know anything about Bob Greasy." I said, "I just kept my mouth shut."
You were in school with him?
He was a senior when I was a freshman, and I got to watch him play both football and basketball. He was a three-sport. He also played baseball. He was a letterman all 4 years in each sport. They'll tell you this from just watching him play in those days. He was one of the greatest natural athletes that ever lived.
And Rex Monday's not in operation anymore, right?
No.
Yeah. So where'd you go to college?
IU Bloomington, and then I went to IU Bloomington Law School.
What was your major in undergrad?
Chemistry. And,
Chemistry.
Yeah, and if you follow up with one of those questions, how'd you get interested in law? I got to a certain point in studying chemistry where I knew I wasn't going to be any PhD scientist, and if you didn't do that, you were either in sales or low-level lab research, or maybe a school teacher, and none of that really appealed to me. I'd taken a criminology course. I had a minor in sociology, and I thought criminology was very interesting, so I took a business law and criminal law undergraduate course, and by about my second semester, junior year, I thought, well, you know, this practice of law looks real interesting. I think that'd be a nice way to make a living, and it's been interesting.
And then you graduated there in 72, did you?
Yeah, I was on what they called an accelerated program. It was a deal where you could go intersessions in summer school. There was a group of us that tried that, and because I wanted to get out as soon as possible and just set that world on fire.
So did you graduate in January then, or in?
No, it was in basically August of 72.
Okay.
Well, it was at summer session. It was the kind of deal where you could take, back then you could take the bar in, I think it was July, and then you got your results a month or so later.
Is that what you did?
Yeah.
What'd you do after that?
Well, of course, senior year, I started looking for a job, interviewing with all I could, sending out resumes. Let me say something nice about the Evansville bar back then. I sent out a lot of blind resumes to different smaller single practitioners, smaller firms. I had an interview with one of the bigger firms. I won't mention which one. It's gone now, but they kind of let me know right from the start that they weren't interested. That was okay. And the one nice thing I'll say about the Evansville bar, it was Bill Powell, Sid Berger, and Jim Lobb Sr. who sent me replies saying, "We don't have any job openings, but we'd be glad to talk to you about the practice law in Evansville." And if I remember right, it was my Thanksgiving holiday before I graduated. I set up appointments, let's say on a afternoon, and came down and had little half-hour appointments talking to those fellas. And I always remember that. That was very courteous of them to do that.
So what did you end up doing?
Well, I interviewed for a lot of jobs, but the one I came across was, at that time, what was then Credit Thrift. They had a two-man legal department, and they'd done that for years, and they desperately needed another attorney. And I interviewed with them, and I got a job. And I won't say I was very selective. It was the only real job offer I got, but it was a good job offer.
So explain to us what Credit Thrift is or was.
Well, it started out as interstate finance, part of the Evansville history, that if you check into the history, like circa 1920s, we had automobile factories here, and they needed consumer financing so that your average person and even some businesses could buy a truck. And interstate finance started, and that grew into what was Credit Thrift. They originally had a building in what would be the old Morris Plant building downtown, And they built that big building at 601 Northwest 2nd Street that's expanded. At that time, they only had two attorneys, Carl Bosecker and Lyle Abbott. They needed a third attorney, and I interviewed and went through certain testing and stuff. And I'm saying this tongue in cheek. I found out later that one guy in the personnel department I didn't exactly impress him, but one of the attorneys said, well, we think he's got some good qualities besides he's a local boy who knows Evansville, likes Evansville, and I went aboard there, and it was a good experience. I stayed there for about 5 years till I...
So you practiced with Carl Bosecker and Lyle Abbott?
Yes, I did.
What were they like? What were they like?
Well, they were good role models. Lyle, I spent more time with Lyle. Carl is a wonderful man. I think he's got a brilliant mind, but he was one of those lawyers that he kept his work to himself. He was always there for me to talk to. He would give assignments to me. I worked mainly with Lyle, and Lyle was one of the most interesting people I'd ever met because, he was a retired Army colonel, but you would never think he was a retired Army colonel. He had his moments, but he was so down to earth and cut up, it was unbelievable. Both of them had very interesting backgrounds. Carl never talked about it, but he'd been on Eisenhower's staff for a while during World War II. He was admitted to the bar when he was in Europe. They decided to have he'd graduated from law school but hadn't taken the bar. He went right in the military right away, and they decided to have a waiver for anybody like that. Lyle had a background of, after he got out of college, he went in the military. He was in combat in Europe. He was one of those, he never bragged about anything, but I could get it to come out from him. I always remember this. One time, I asked him if he landed in D-Day, and he said, no, our outfit came in the day after. Being a young smart aleck, I said, don't you feel disappointed that you missed such an exciting time? And he gave me a cold look that I'd never seen before, and he said, no, Charlie, because I'd be dead. And he would every once in a while talk about losing his friends and stuff like that, but in spite of that, he had this joy of living that was unbelievable. And he passed along a lot of good advice to me. Back in those days, I don't know what it was like for you, but in law school, they'd tell us a little bit about ethics, but we never had a course. And I don't think we even had much about it on the bar exam back in those days. But Lyle was always there to tell me, this is the way you do things. And just a terrific role model.
What did you do pretty much at Credit Thrift?
Well, I did the local collection work, the local bankruptcy work, but a lot of it was in-house consumer law stuff. They had branches all over the country at that time. Of course, they've got well, it's all rearranged, it's all changed. But they had branches in almost all the big states, a heavy presence in California, and right away I was being asked, what's your opinion on the such and such, things like that, and had to learn a lot of things real quick.
Didn't you tell me that you recently found some paperwork with regard to the startup of Credit Thrift?
Yeah,
Interstate Finance? Yeah.
Well, it was founded by Richard E. Meyer. If you ever do any historical research on him, he's a fascinating character. I'm one of those people, if you got an old book or something like that, I won't throw it away, I'll pick it up. And in cleaning up some clutter in my apartment, I found this 1930 or something book on the principles and studies of consumer finance that had his signature in it. And on the inside inner leaves that are blank were penciled out a proposed table of organization for the company. And I just thought that was fascinating. Mm-hmm. That
Did you ever meet him, or was he already?
I'd met him one time at a bar association luncheon. It was in the old Jackson House, let's say circa 73 or so. Lyle and I went down there, and he was a guest speaker, and I was introduced to him.
All right, so you were with them about 5 years, you say?
Yeah.
What did you do then?
Well, I got kind of itchy, and I was having a few questions about my future there in the corporate world, so I decided to go out on my own. I had a friend named Paul Wendell, and he and I set up a office in the lower level of the what was then called the Erie Building, and good old 5011 Washington Avenue. And we just shared office space. We never became partners. We had separate phones and everything, but Paul stayed busy a lot working as a county attorney for an awful long time, and I didn't really have anything going for me, but I ended up basically picking up local collection and bankruptcy work for Credit Thrift and some of its affiliates on a retainer basis, and I did that till maybe the early 1990s, and I picked up some other collection work. I had a nice general practice doing a little bit of everything, title opinions, different things like that.
That was back when lawyers were writing title opinions.
Oh yeah,
Before title insurance, right?
and that's exactly what did it away with me. The clients all decided we're going with title insurance only, and if you didn't have a title insurance plan, goodbye.
Did you do much trial work in the courthouse?
Not, I did a bit of it during those 5 years at Credit Thrift. I had some court trials, civil matters. I defended them on a contract dispute in a jury trial. They threw me in there all by myself with no jury experience, and I lost, but it wasn't a surprising loss. But I got down to the courthouse a bit.
Then you went to part-time with a prosecutor, did you? Did you
Right.
not? When was that?
It was January '79. There was an opening came up then, and I got in there, and it was mainly misdemeanor traffic. And over the years, I ended up doing a bit of jury trial work. One time I had to have a resume prepared, and there was a time when all the jury trial work faded away. I've been doing misdemeanor traffic mainly for years, but I estimate I might have tried 50 plus jury trials, did several grand juries, which was interesting.
Who were the prosecutors you worked under?
I worked under Jeff Lance, Bob Pigman, and Stan Levko. And I'm working under Mr. Herman right now.
So then how'd your practice go then? When did you, have you wrapped it up now?
Yeah, I was mentioning beforehand that if you want to tell, this probably comes under telling young lawyers things. Things are going to change. You can do the best work in the world for a client, and clients decide that things need to change. And with a lot of my collection work, these businesses adopted the idea of let's just have one attorney in the state. That's very efficient. Sure, somebody in Indianapolis is going to cover Evansville very well, but that's my tongue-in-cheek comment. But I gradually lost a lot of that business, and there came a time when I decided I just couldn't keep the office open anymore, and it was technically shut down early June of this year, 2020. But I was very fortunate in that Nick Herman found out about it and asked me to go on full time, and since that time I've been
the prosecutor.
A full-time prosecutor, again, working a lot of misdemeanor traffic, spending a lot of time. I know attorneys that don't think you have to do anything to prep for even stuff like that. Trust me, if you want to be on your toes, and if a judge says, give me the status on this case, you better be ready to do it. And I and the other deputies that work there are three of us that work misdemeanor traffic, I think, take certain pride in being prepared.
Did you also do weekend court out of the jail?
Yeah.
Tell us what that was.
Well, it was interesting. It was fun. It was down to earth. We called it paper court. And first of all, it started out in the courthouse. Our judges, you know, there came the Supreme Court decision where it said that there has to be a probable cause finding by an impartial magistrate within about, I think, 72 hours. Well, for years, we would have to come in and handle new misdemeanor arrest and felony pre-charges on Saturday morning. I would have to get down to the police department at about 7 in the morning on Saturday, pick up the new reports, find out who was in custody, go over to the prosecutor's office, prep things, even fill out informations on some of them. You know, those old days where you filled in the blanks on paper. But what was interesting back then was that on a felony preliminary charge, we had to be ready to present evidence. There was a public defender always on duty. They would come in, and then private counsel could come in, and unless they wanted to waive that, I had to have an officer there ready to give a basic summary of why there was probable cause. And it was fun work to the extent that I was working with the officers and getting to know them, and you know, a lot of that changed when the law basically said you didn't have to present any live evidence. You could have just a probable cause finding based on the affidavit.
And you had a judge or a magistrate there that make that decision?
To do that. It shifted from that to where we're not going to be in the courtroom. For the longest time, we would meet in the record room and go through those things, and then we ended up being on the second floor of the jail. We got out to the new jail and worked there, but a combination of a few things like COVID basically did away with that. Once COVID started, I didn't mind it, you know. I've been around germs, but there were other people that thought that the county jail, even though we were in a pretty sterile pathway in place, wasn't that nice, and it went to kind of an all electronic communication. And finally, the bottom line is several weeks ago, I got out of it. A young deputy prosecutor, whenever I worked it, I didn't get any what they call comp time, compensation time. Once I became full-time, I did, but there was another deputy prosecutor who, for certain reasons, wanted a lot of comp time, and he asked if he could take it over. And I'll say this out loud: when you're doing it all electronically, it's not any fun anymore. You don't have the interaction with the people. And when I say do it electronically, I or the deputy prosecutor would get down there. We'd have certain reports emailed to us. We would review them, email them to the judge with bond recommendations based on history, and then the judge would make the probable cause finding. You might get an email from the judge saying, I really need more information on this background, or do you have a supplemental report to back up the such and such allegation? But it's still being done. Vanderbilt County, I think, is probably about the only county in the state that has that, and that's Saturday, Sunday, and holidays. So there's due process out there.
So we're sitting in what we know as the old courthouse now, the one that was built in the 1880s, and the whole court system moved over to what we call the new courthouse around 1970. So you never practiced in this old building?
No, I never did.
So you've been practicing the new building for, 48 years, I guess? Yeah. What changes have you seen over there over all those years as far as the facilities? Tell us about the facilities, whether you liked them or not, and whether they were serviceable, and what's happened to them.
Well, I think they are serviceable. You've got, first of all, I think as far as this county, I think we've got a terrific law library, and we've had a history of good law librarians. It's my understanding, from a historical purpose, most law libraries were set up so that the judges would have access to the books and be able to consult the law and things like that. Then the attorneys could use them, the public could. But it's been great for attorneys to have that research facility, even this age of computers. Recently, I came across an unpublished decision referencing some annotations that, even though I knew I couldn't cite it, it was a similar fact situation. And I thought, well, I could get at least some leads on other good cases, and I couldn't bring it up on a computer, and went over to the law library, and she got it for me right away. The facilities. I think as far as having the rooms for either court trials or jury trials, witness conferences, it's just a good facility.
Tell us about some of the lawyers you dealt with that especially stand out in your mind, and why they do.
Well, from just a personal non-practicing standpoint, one of the people that is beloved by me was the late Judge Tom Lockyer. I got to know him when I first got out of law school, because he'd done some work covering cases for credit thrift when Lyle Abbott had to be out of town and things like that.
When he was an attorney.
When he was an attorney. I had just an observer role where he and Bob Hahn were defense attorneys on a claim made against some credit thrift affiliates, and got to sit in on it, got to know him. We worked an awful lot with that paper court. When he was a regular judge, he would volunteer to cover it because he was living downtown. It was nothing for him to just come down to the police station and work. And he was down to earth, open, never pretentious. He became like a big brother or uncle to me. And one of the things that really impressed me, and I'm getting this in a record for history, over the course of the years, because of health problems, he lost both of his legs, and he spent the latter part of his life in a wheelchair. He always had a real nice van with the mobile controls, but even though he'd lost his legs, he always had a smile on his face, and he always had a real good attitude. He never felt sad about it. He always looked at the positive things in life. I'll tell one little war story. On a Saturday afternoon, I was visiting him in the hospital after he had lost his second leg. A nephew of his was in there with us, and in walks this fellow in a white coat who introduces himself as Dr. So-and-so, a resident in podiatry, who is there to examine him. I had to bite my lip and look at the ceiling to just control myself. Tom just smiled and said, "Doc, I hate to tell you this, but you're a little bit too late." Well, it turned out that part of the podiatry residency was dealing with amputees and talking to them about their issues. And Tom later told me that doc came around to see him on a regular basis, and they had just the best of a time. But think about how your average person would react to that, and then you got somebody just smiles and makes a joke out of it. I've had the pleasure of dealing with a lot of good attorneys. I've dealt with some bad ones. We won't talk about those, but doing criminal work, it's really essential that you can, prosecutors and defense attorneys can trust each other. You can BS a little bit, but I've had defense attorneys totally exaggerate things. Classic example was Charlie. Now this is just a little minor hit and run. I look at the report. His client ran somebody over with a car with a broken leg. That's an example of a little bit too much exaggeration. Two lawyers that I could always trust were John Klaus and Jack Davis. They were very good advocates, fighters in the courtroom and outside the courtroom, but if they never pulled any stunts, and you can always trust them. A classic example I learned from Jack Davis, he had a way of negotiating. He'd approach me about a case, and he'd say, "Now, Charlie, I've gone over this." And of course, he was an ex-appellate attorney for the AG's office, a real tough prosecutor. And he would tell me, he said, "I think you can prove this, but you can't prove that. Now let's work something out based on what you can prove." And I'd look at that file, and he was right. There was no exaggeration, no nonsense. And that kind of trust is invaluable. And I would like to think that younger attorneys, or all attorneys, would try to develop that kind of trust.
Same with John Klaus.
Oh yeah, exactly. And I'll say it, part of the deal is that these fellows had reputation in the general community as being, I think carousers might be a mild term and things like that, but whatever they might have, and I heard old-time police officers tell this about Jack Davis. Whatever he might do off duty, that's one thing, but when he's working as a prosecutor, he's the best, and that's what he was when he was a defense attorney. Being an Evansville native, I'll tell you, being a young attorney, in the general public, you have all these rumors about attorneys and what attorneys do and what attorneys are like. You would hear stories about Mr. Klaus, Marion Rice, Claude Bates, things like that. I'm a young attorney right out of law school, and I'm bumping up against them in low-level civil cases and things like that. And I'm trying cases and I'm winning cases every once in a while, but one thing I learned real quick was most of the stuff rumors that they have out there in the general public about we attorneys just aren't true.
You dealt with Jim Lopp Sr., did you?
Not too much, but oh yeah, he was colorful. One of my Jim Lopp stories is that I'm in the courthouse one Friday morning, and this lady comes up to me and goes, where's Jim Lopp Sr.? And I said, she's looking for him or something like that. And later I walk up to him and I say, now, Mr. Lopp, there's a lady named so-and-so that's looking for you. Now, Charlie, we can get this worked out. I said, no, Mr. Lopp, this is your client. She's looking for you.
So how has the practice of law changed in the last 48 years?
Well, I think it's gotten a little bit more complicated. The attorneys, I don't think, with more of us and a certain amount of distancing, there's social distancing. We don't have the old lawyers' coffee lounge the way we used to, where lawyers would get together and talk every once in a while. People don't want to spend any time down at the courthouse. If they go to the courthouse, it's let's get the work done and get out of here. Practice of law, over the years, things have changed. Rules of procedure have changed, but I've seen what I thought was too many. Let's add a rule to have a rule. I think about when I first started practicing law, if you wanted to file a motion for summary judgment, you filed a basic form motion and you had a little short memorandum after that. You had a supporting affidavit. And now you have to have the proposed entry, designation of issues, this, that. I know that a lot of the procedure rules were never simple. The older lawyers told me about the old-time pleading before we got notice pleading, where you'd argue this and argue that to death. But
Technology change, of course. Technology.
All technology is unbelievable. I can remember when I was a young lawyer, if you had a IBM Selectric or a mag card writer, you were hot stuff. And then came the word processors, and they gave way to the computers. But it's a use of technology. I don't know how many years ago it came in, but in our ethics rules, there is now a rule that an attorney has a duty to maintain a basic knowledge of current technology. I don't think anybody's ever been disciplined over that, but I can tell you that I'm on the lower level of it. I'm the barely get there. You may have seen it years ago in practice, and I see it over at the prosecutors. The younger lawyers can do all their own pleadings and word processing, and they grew up on all that stuff. When I went to high school, I took a typing course and learned how to type, and that was the exception. And that's helped me through the years on what they now call keyboarding. But again, that was our high tech back in those days.
If you could talk to young law students or prospective law students, what would you like to tell them about the practice of law?
Well, first of all, it's a very, very interesting way to work. It's an interesting profession. Back in my young days, many years ago, there was an expression that went around called the law is a jealous mistress. And I think about, particularly when I did jury trials, all of what you'd call the lost weekends. If you had a jury trial starting on a Monday, at least for me, I spent Saturday and Sunday prepping for it. Yeah, and you tell your average person and relatives, if this means missing Aunt Tilly's reception on Sunday, a lot of people have a hard time understanding that. You're going to have to work hard and work hard than other people, and people won't appreciate it. When I was a kid, there was a fellow down the street who was an engineer that had a construction company, and he had his own little private building where he would go out there and work on, say, construction estimates, building estimates, and people would talk about, be quiet around there or something, because that's very important work. I've rarely seen that kind of respect shown for attorneys. Getting back to the prospective students, I would recommend that they contact some Evansville attorneys and ask them if they'd have a half hour so of time just to talk about the practice of law and what to expect in the practice of law. Back in my day, we had Perry Mason and some other shows. There were LA Law. There's all kinds of reality drama. People need to get an idea of what practicing law is like. The other thing is, back in my day, we didn't have high tuitions and low placement rates. I think they need to get an idea of what law school will cost them and what their chances of getting a job are from a real practical standpoint.
You remember what your tuition was when you went to law school?
I can't remember what it was when I was in law school. I remember when I started as an undergraduate, it was $11 an hour. You take 16 hours, that was $176 a semester. Now, as Malcolm Montgomery used to always say, that was before inflation, and the minimum wage wasn't much over $1 an hour. So you translate that. But again, one thing I remember is I know about the tremendous student loan debts a lot of the law students have. And back in my day, there were people that had to take out student loans, but it wasn't that much. A lot of us managed to squeak through without any debt. And as far as the young lawyers starting out, this is pretty grim, but when I was a young lawyer, one older lawyer told me, in this profession we have two occupational diseases, alcoholism and suicide. If you change that to substance abuse and suicide, I hate to say that I've seen it, and I've seen it even up until today. It's a rough way to go. We now have the JLAP that we didn't have before. I would tell people,
What is that?
that's a Judge Lawyers Assistance Program, and I don't know if it's through the Supreme Court, but I've been to the seminars and heard the presentations about it, and it's basically, if you want help, help is there, and it's totally confidential. They have local representatives that they can fix you up. They have local agencies that can help you out.
Do you think that that's a danger of law practice that can encourage those type of problems? Is that what you're saying?
I think the practice of law is high stress. It's there are people that say it doesn't get to them and they don't care and they laugh everything off, and they may, but I think for the rest of us it can be very stressful. Think about these economic times with COVID. I've talked to a few other lawyers. I said, are you hanging on? And they say, yeah, but times are tough. Of course, we have to warn them. You don't plan on getting rich, all that stuff. So, and again, Evansville, your average Evansville resident back in my youth thought all lawyers were rich. And no, I had to argue in my younger days. I had to argue with relatives about that.
Do you remember what your starting salary was at Credit Thrift?
$175 a week.
Yeah.
But again, for context, I went out and bought my first car at Vanderveer Dodge, and I think it was $2,100. So.
Can you tell us what your most favorite thing about practicing law was and what your least favorite thing was?
Well, I'll call it the least favorite thing is that you could do the best job in the world for a lot of clients, and they really didn't appreciate it. Not only they didn't appreciate it, sometimes they didn't want to pay you, and then after you would do that good work, they'd switch over to another lawyer. I'd say one of the really gratifying things was working as a deputy prosecutor and making life hell for bad guys. And not so much, getting a big sentence, maybe just getting a conviction, but I see it to this day. I saw it yesterday in court with a guy who, this was the third time he'd slapped around his wife. And a lot of those people, they'll learn in the courtroom that you can't just do that. They'll learn that they may be tough out on the streets, but there's going to be some kind of justice come to them. And one other thing, I'm chuckling. I learned this early on as a young prosecutor. A lot of these criminal characters really think we lawyers are dumb, that we've led I'm trying to think the word, I've retired type existence, so we really don't know anything about life. We've never been in a fight. We never got drunk. We never got into an argument. And trust me, when they try to bamboozle us on their testimony, they're messing with the wrong people.
How have you, how do you size up the members of the Evansville Bar over the years you've practiced?
Generally, I think they're good people. It's, you want to talk about diversity, we've always had a diversity of lawyers and that different personalities, different types of people. You're going to meet different people. But I think all in all, they've been pretty decent to each other. I've had some people that have done, I'm trying to think of one particular person who was, didn't do anything bad to me, but just had a general bad, arrogant attitude. Well, I kind of saved his bacon one time in a criminal case, and his attitude changed after that. It's almost kind of a, biblical principle where you have to be decent to people even though you don't like them. And if you try to do that, it'll work out.
Is there anything else you want to talk about, Charlie, before we end it?
I'll talk about advice to young lawyers. I think I may have already said it. You're going to be hurt because you're going to find clients that really don't appreciate the good work you've done for them. You're going to have people that are disloyal to you, but just hang in there and keep doing what's right. And
There are rewards to the practice, aren't there?
yeah, there are. Oh, trust me, there are times where I've walked out of that courtroom, like I said, particularly in a criminal case where, and it's almost like a drama where you can see that criminal defendant, and when I say criminal court, you can imagine misdemeanor traffic. We run into all kinds of people that really aren't criminals. They just make dumb mistakes. But we run into the truly evil criminal types, but they get their comeuppance, and there's a real satisfaction to that.
Who are some of the judges you dealt with?
It's about all of them. Well, think about it. Starting out, I'm thinking we had Judge Miller on the circuit court. I never really got to deal with him until I was trying jury trials as a prosecutor. But we had, Claude Lynn, Mort Newman, Terry Deach, and Maury Merrill. And over the years, we had other judges come in. I'll say this out loud. The younger attorneys, I don't think, appreciate the fact that we've got a bunch of pretty decent judges now in the way that they treat younger lawyers. There were some lawyers over the years of my younger days they'd tell you in open court, you don't know what you're doing right in front of your client or something like that. Had some temperament issues. One particular judge, I don't want to mention his name, he was a very fine judge, but he'd call you boy in open court. I mean, I compared notes on that with some of the other lawyers, and if you had a client who was getting a little restless, he'd say, "Now that boy, your attorney," I'd go, "Gosh."
Also, you might say that we've got a lot more women attorneys, don't we?
Yes.
From when we started.
And I read these things about how we're supposedly male chauvinists and don't like that, but I'll tell you, I like it. Of course, you like dealing with women, and there's some very good women attorneys. Historically, I always remember that when Lori Baden-Baum started practicing with John Klaus, up until that time, a lot of the women attorneys mainly did probate or a few other things, but Lori got right in there and tried a case, and didn't bother me. I liked it. She's another example of a good attorney.
Anything else you want to talk about?
No, not really. I could.
Well, it's been good talking with you, Charlie.
Well, it's been good talking to you, Carl. We could tell all the people that, went out to that place called 5011 Washington Avenue, and he was upstairs, and we spent a lot of years out there, and always got along real well with everybody in your law firm.
It was a good building, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And, this doesn't have anything to do with practice. Well, I mean, one of those questions on the thing was, what do you predict for Evansville in the future? Well, all you can predict is change, because you and I remember the days when the parking lot at Washington Square Mall was packed, and now it's totally empty. So, yeah, if I was asked that question, I'd say the only thing I can predict is change, and I don't dare tell you what it will be.
It's always change, isn't there?
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, Charlie. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Carl.
Yeah.